Alright, once again another updated deck profile. This time post after Divine Set 12, but because we got a new promo that I held off for a while just because it was too expensive on release. But now with a new promo, this deck actually kind of changed up quite a bit, especially on the lineup, especially with the releases over time, like a generic Encounter card. And now recently we got a reveal of Ren Icon versions of Shadow Paladin, which is definitely going to also update this deck, but right now it's not released. So I'm just doing this deck profile now with the new Grade 3 promo that actually changed up the deck a lot. And overall, I had this deck since the beginning on its release and even had its original version when it was first released just because I'm an edgy Dark Lord Dragon type person. And I really love the Dark Knight design that I end up really building the deck. I had a G version of the deck, I even had the V version of the deck, and now I even have the Encounter version, and I'm probably gonna even build the Ren Icon version as well. And with this version, I had it since release, and even with set 5 from the Dress era, I definitely had Phantom Blaster Overlord, with Phantom Blaster Overlord originally being one of the best decks on release, and over time it just kind of got power crapped. But with good promos, the deck definitely got way better, but kind of got outdated until our recent promo, which does actually make it better here and there, and occasionally can still compete with some current decks, although current decks are still better. And once again, like typical Shadow Paladin, it does focus on retiring your own rearguards for its benefit, although with Phantom Blaster Overlord, it does focus around with Blaster Dark, so you do actually need to play Blaster Dark in this deck. And with the new promo, still focus on Blaster Dark, because no matter what, Blaster Dark is basically your MVP for the deck. But anyway, with all that out of the way, let's just begin with the deck profile with, of course, what as you can tell, with the Ride deck, with the evolution in the Ride deck, and base form in the main deck, meaning that you still need the base form. So here's the starter. Fubao, which, yes, you could run the Royal Paladin with Marin, but I'm going to choose to stick with archetype reasons. So I go to Blaster Javelin instead of using Marin because Blaster Javelin just goes with the archetype. So when the Blaster Dark rides on top of it, Superior Call the top card of the deck, which is mandatory, so unfortunately if it's over trigger, you do have to call it. In which we go to Blaster Dark himself. So when placed, either Vanguard Rearguard, you can counterblast 1 to retire one of your rearguards, and then retire one of your opponent's rearguards, and then it gets Drive +1 into the end turn. Keep in mind about this ability. It says Drive +1, meaning that if it's on rearguard, you do not actually get any drive checks until you give it the ability to drive check. But this ability does come up quite often just for its full benefit. But based on Grade 2 turn, you get a Twin Drive, and also it lets you retire your opponent's stuff, which is also very good. In which we go to kind of the outdated Phantom Blaster Overlord, where while you have Phantom Blaster Dragon Soul, it gets a crit +1, and it's completely permanent, which actually makes complete crit pressure for your Vanguard, which is something I like. With the second skill, which is completely free of counterblast, which is actually what made this card very good back in the day, where when this card attacks, you can retire 2 of your rearguards to Superior Call Blaster Dark from a drop zone, and if your opponent's at least Grade 3, both this and that unit gets plus 10 key power. So it was a free 4th attack, even though it does cost you 2 rearguards, that doesn't really matter. Especially now with the promos definitely cheapen out this cost. So it's something you can damage deny, and it's just a free 4th attack technically, with the inclusion of Blaster Dark, and of course with extra power, and this one has the extra crit for free. That's what makes this pretty good back in the day, although right now it's just not as strong as most other cards, but still free power crit and a 4th attack, very nice. So that's why I still kind of like this deck. And now to the main deck itself. So first off, obviously 3 more copies for Persona Ride. And then I run 4 Phantom Blaster Dragons. Now, this card is not going to put itself to Soul, and neither will Phantom Blaster Overlord. Your support cards are going to put it to Soul. And that's why I run 4 of, just to make it as max consistency as possible to put it to Soul for the crit pressure, because that crit pressure actually does a lot, especially if it's on your Vanguard. But if you are forced to ride it, well, you can call a Blaster unit from your Soul when you ride it, and once per turn, you can counterblast 1 to retire 3 rearguards, to choose up to 2 of your opponent's rearguards to retire, and this card gets plus 10 key power and crit +1. This is just in case you're forced to ride it, but preferably you don't use it just because obviously Phantom Blaster Overlord is better as it's free, 1 less retire, 1 less counterblast, and also power distributed to 2 units instead of just basically being himself. But 4 of just to maximize consistency to put it to Soul. Now the new promo card that is definitely a 4 of is the Judgment Haiti Dragon, because this one does basic 2 units into 1. So first off, if you're playing Shadow Paladin, this is treated as Shadow Paladin, meaning that this is actually searchable through Shadow Paladin means. That's already very huge. The second part is that when placed on rearguard, while your Vanguard is a blaster, you can put a card from your hand to soul to draw a card. That's a free version of Nemen basically, although you only draw one card instead. But the fact that you put something from hand to soul is very huge because it could be the Phantom Blaster Dragon. This is basically a way to get your Phantom Blaster Overlord to full power. But not only that, this is treated as 2 retires for a blaster, meaning that you're lessening 1 retire for your Phantom Blaster Overlord, which I'm going to say this might be even good for the Ren Icon version as well. So meaning that this is counted as 2 retires, you just need to retire 1 unit basically. With the final skill when this card is retired by ability of your Vanguard Blaster, you can enter boss 3 to choose a Blaster Dark from your rearguard, and it gets the skill until you turn. When this card attacks, it gets the ability to drive check. So one key thing about this is that there was originally another promo that does exactly the same thing, counts as 2 retires and give Blaster Dark drive checks. But that one requires your opponent to be at grade 3 for the drive checks. So this card is infinitely better because you could use this even if your opponent's still at grade 2, which is definitely a lot of pressure right there. But not only that, it has added skills to make it searchable and also basically make your Phantom Blaster Overlord full power as well. So no reason not to run this at 4 of, especially basically what you're supposed to do is just retire this to Phantom Blaster Overlord and Phantom Blaster Overlord Superior calls Blaster Dark, and then this card still activates to give Blaster Dark the drive check ability. So yeah, new MVP of the deck, so you just have to run 4 of. And so that's it for the grade 3 lineup. To the grade 2 lineup, here's Blaster Dark. I ran 2 more copies just in case of your 1 copy of Blaster Dark getting bound, and also because you need to reliably Soul Blast the Ride deck Blaster Dark, so it's better to have extra copies just in case that you just needed to discard it for the drop zone. And also it has a rearguard skill when you retire one of your rearguards during your turn plus 5k, which is definitely going to add up for your numbers. And then to continue off, for the last of the Shadow Paladins, is the Skullwitch Nemen. Originally this was the 4 of, and the 4 of that would put the Phantom Blaster Dragon in Soul. Now, because of all the support, you could actually just take this out, but I still kind of like it just because you can counter boss 1 to put a card from your hand to Soul to draw 2 cards, and it gets plus 5k power while your Vanguard is Blaster, which will make it just 10k power just because it's 5k base. But I still just kind of like it for the 2 draw, which is why I do it, but you could completely take this out if you wish. And then a card that was originally ran as 4 of, which is the Knight of Severity, which is the original promo that counted as 2 retire and give your Blaster Dark drive check, but it requires your opponent to be at grade 3, which is why this is now just a backup card just to basically give your Blaster Dark drive check, because there are occasions you don't draw the other one, so you just need a backup one to give your Blaster Dark drive check. And unlike the other one, this one's completely free to give your Blaster Dark drive check, but does cost a card from your hand to discard. So it depends on you, but definitely the other one's better just because the deck doesn't really use energy, but this card doesn't require any energy or anything, so it depends on how you built the deck, but definitely the other one's still better because the part where your opponent doesn't need to be at grade 3. But this is here as a backup if you want to do it, and the crazy part is that if you retire both, you could actually give 2 Blaster Darks extra drive checks, but it's not that consistent, so I don't recommend it. And then to continue off, Emilius. So this one was originally another 4 of that got taken out to 2 of, because one of this card gets was 5k power every time a blaster unit attacks, which is even more when you're playing Majesty Lord Blaster, but basically a 10k power buff because Blaster Dark, Phantom Blaster Dragon, maybe up to 15k if your other rear card is a Blaster Dark, but that's unlikely to happen. With the other skill, when placed from hand, you can Soul Blast 1 to look at top character's deck to choose up to 1 blaster unit to put to hand, but if you put a card to your hand, you discard a card, which is something I don't like because essentially it's a 1-for-1 trade, plus an extra Soul Blast, but it's also a beater on its own, which is why I still kind of like it, while also at the same time, it does actually Soul Blast the Blaster Dark out, which does actually help, and can occasionally search for key pieces, so that's why I still kind of run it, but you could completely take this out if you wish. But one card that you probably should run as a 4 of is the Undercover Shadow Paladin, Ura, which when placed on rearguard while your Vanguard is either Undercover or Shadow Paladin, you can counterblast 1 to look at top 5 cards of your deck to search up to 1 Undercover or Shadow Paladin from among them and add it to your hand, which includes even PGs, and yes, you do have Shadow Paladin PG, which actually makes this card very good. And the fact that you could search for any Shadow Paladin is just very nice, especially for a deck that sometimes and sometimes not counterblast heavy. But the second skill makes it even better. When this card attacks at grade 3, you can Soul Blast 1 to give it plus 10k power while your Vanguard is either Undercover or Shadow Paladin. So it's a big beater on its own, and it's also a searcher. That's why you just run 4 of, especially for a deck that maybe sometimes or sometimes not get Counterblast heavy. but you don't use the search too often, but it is there to help you out if you need it. And so that's it for the grade 2 lineup, and now for the grade 1 lineup. So first off, the Encounter generic Battle Sister Goko, which is so good in this deck, and probably any other Encounter deck for Cater, just because of the ability where when placed on rearguard, you can put a card from your hand to soul to look at top 2 cards of your deck to choose up to 1 card from among them to either put to hand or soul. But if you decide to put to soul, this card gives us 5k power, which is just a nice added consistency to put another Phantom Blaster Dragon soul. And also fills up soul if you do need it. So that's why this is already a 4-up, because just the part where you can set up yourself for full power. With the second part of the skill where on count rearguard guardian, if your opponent drive checks or damage check a trigger during the turn, it gets plus 10k power and 10k shield, which is very nice to basically nullify the trigger power, because trigger power gives plus 10k, well this card also gets plus 10k, so it kind of just nullifies the trigger power. And even just the shield value as well, being a 15k shield, just in case that you need it. In many cases you will, which is why I really love this card as a 4-of. So yeah, this card is just too good for the deck. And then to continue off, I run 2 Din Drain just because soul is not too much of an issue for this deck, and also counter charge just in case you need it. I am thinking about bumping this up to maybe 3-of, just because it is using a little more counterblast thanks to the undercover card, but 2 is still working pretty well. And then I run a tech card that I personally don't see many people running, but I do kind of want to run it, which is Pyrium, which has a skill when placed on rearguard during the main phase, you can counterblast 1, and choose a card grade less than or equal to your Vanguard from your hand and call it to rearguard and then draw a card. The reason why I decided to run this is just because of extra draw power, which the deck kind of does need sometimes. The deck sometimes lack plussing, so this is just another way just to plus. In which the second skill is that if your Vanguard is at least grade 3 plus 5k, so it could also be a 13k booster, so it does make numbers and does plus you, but it's not the most necessary card, so you could always run something else. But personally, I just kind of like to tech this in because it does actually do some stuff and does help you with pluses. And then finally, 4 PGs, 4 of them, all 4 of them being Shadow Paladin. And now to the trigger lineup. OT, pick whatever you want, but then I personally will pick this one just because of theming reasons, and also because Cater OT is not that great for the deck. And then 8 crits, because I love my crits. 3 draws, because you do need those key pieces, and draw power is very helpful for the deck. And 4 heals, 2 being counters. And so that's it for this deck profile on my Phantom Blaster Overlord deck. What do you guys think of it? What other cards would you recommend, and what other changes would you make? Personally, after playtesting this deck for so long, especially with the new grade 3 promo, I kind of like the deck how it is. I might actually still switch up some of the grade 1s, because this deck does actually still kind of want those boosters and can sometimes be short on power, which is why I ran that grade 1 in the first place. But overall, the deck hasn't really changed too much, but the new grade 3 promo does actually kind of change the lineup just because of how useful it is in comparison to what originally was this one being the grade 2 that does exactly the same thing. And I was very surprised that they even remembered Phantom Blaster Overlord when it comes to just giving it support. And now we got Ren Icon versions, which might actually change up the deck a bit again, just because of Shadow Paladin reasons. And I do hope that it's not restricted to Ren Icon, because that would kind of suck. But overall, I do really love this old deck just getting support. And when old decks get support, I'm kind of very happy about it just because they didn't forget about it. While the deck is not that great, it is still pretty strong just because of its support, especially the generic support over time. But I wouldn't say this deck is completely budget heavy just because of this card. And also because of the promos. Because the promos always get expensive and it gets hard to find, and it's Shadow Paladin, so there's a tax for it because it's too popular. And personally, I just love the deck's design, which is why I built the deck in the first place. And on release with D-Series, it was very cheap, but then promos kind of made it expensive. And over time, it just got more generic support that made it expensive. But overall, still a fun deck. So if you really love Dark Knights, I can still recommend this deck for you if you just love its design. But in that's for this, and see you next time.